Every morning, a servant carried myrrh smoke through the pillared halls. The double crown of Egypt was polished to brightness. The priests recited what they had recited for 10,000 mornings before this one. The Nile moved south to north, as it always had. No one inside had a word for what was already marching toward them. It took one afternoon. 3 centuries of unbroken Ptolemaic rule dissolved into the mud of a river delta. The last heir of Alexander's generals sank past the root of the reeds, his golden breastplate pulling him down. The servants laid out the crown that evening. No one came to wear it. For 300 years, the Mediterranean worshipped the wealth and independence of the unshakable Hellenistic dynasties. Yet the cracks in this magnificent facade were violently exposed when Caesar bypassed their blockades and united with a massive relief force. The true battle was not between brother and sister. It was between the chaotic, dying traditions of the East and the ruthless, industrial warfare of the West. As Roman iron breached the high ground, the once mighty Egyptian defenders shattered, fleeing in absolute terror into the suffocating river. With the sinking of a golden breastplate, the Hellenistic world quietly expired, instantly replaced by the iron collar of Roman imperialism. As the shadow of Rome stretched across the granary of the Mediterranean, who would be the next to feed its insatiable hunger? But before the Roman eagles could fully consume this wealth, a final, desperate stand had to be broken. The story of this ultimate subjugation begins not with a diplomatic treaty, but within the claustrophobic walls of a besieged city. The Shattered Crown. The collision of 2 eras. The year is 47 BC. The scorching Mediterranean sun beats down upon Egypt. The world is in a state of precarious transition, locked in a period of severe structural realignment. The Alexandrian War is reaching its terrifying crescendo. At first glance, this is a bitter dynastic struggle, a ruthless war of succession tearing a family apart. It pitted the brilliant, fiercely ambitious Cleopatra VII against her younger brother, the boy king Ptolemy XIII. However, beneath the surface of this sibling rivalry over the vast, unparalleled wealth of the Nile River lay a much deeper, more fundamental clash. This was the seismic collision of 2 distinct eras. The grand, fading traditions of the Ptolemaic kingdom were coming face to face with the rising, cold, and methodical efficiency of the Roman Republic. These were the proud heirs of Alexander the Great's Macedonian generals, who had ruled as living gods for centuries. This new world order was embodied by the legendary tactician and statesman, Gaius Julius Caesar. The impending conflict was not merely about who would wear the double crown of Egypt. It was a battle that would effectively terminate centuries of Egyptian independence. It was destined to place the inexhaustible grain supplies and gold of the Nile firmly within the inescapable orbit of Rome. The geography of attrition. For months, the war has dragged on in a bitter stalemate within the labyrinthine streets of Alexandria. The Roman general Gaius Julius Caesar finds himself in an increasingly precarious position. Cut off from immediate maritime reinforcement and barricaded within the royal quarter, he is facing a meticulously organized blockade. His position is geographically untenable without external intervention. But the winds of fate shifted abruptly with the arrival of massive reinforcements from the east. Mithridates of Pergamum, a staunch, wealthy, and vital ally to Caesar's cause, has mobilized a formidable relief force. Mithridates is something the ancient world does not quite have a category for. His father was Mithridates VI of Pontus, the king who spent 30 years as Rome's greatest enemy, who poisoned himself incrementally to build immunity, who killed himself rather than surrender to Pompey. This is that man's son, having marched overland from Asia Minor to rescue Julius Caesar from a palace siege. The ancient world runs on irony the way rivers run on water. This particular irony, Rome, saved by the son of Rome's worst enemy, is the kind the Romans themselves would have appreciated. It is the sort of thing the gods arrange when they want to make a point. Modern historical analysis estimates this force to be between 10,000 and 15,000 Levantine auxiliaries. This is corroborated by accounts such as those found in the Antiquities of the Jewish People by Josephus. Drawn from the sun-baked plains of Syria and the rugged terrains of Asia Minor, they included significant Jewish contingents under the command of Antipater. His logistical and military support proved crucial in navigating the complex eastern desert. The sheer volume of dust rising from their relentless march signals impending doom. The first major obstacle for Mithridates is Pelusium, the great eastern gateway to Egypt. The chroniclers of the campaign, in the military records of the De Bello Alexandrino, vividly captured the momentum of this advance. They recorded how Mithridates brought the full, terrifying might of his allied army to bear upon Pelusium. Pelusium was no ordinary city. It was the great eastern gateway to Egypt, a towering fortress designed over centuries to repel the fiercest of foreign invaders. Modern excavations at the site, known today as Tel El Farama, reveal massive defensive fortifications and extensive harbor works. These findings confirm the city's absolute strategic importance. It is the key that locks the eastern delta. Yet, under the calculated, large-scale assault of Mithridates, it falls. The ancient walls are breached, the gates smashed open, tearing away the kingdom's primary shield. It opened a direct, vulnerable path straight into the soft heart of the Egyptian delta. Word of this catastrophic breach reached the royal court of Ptolemy XIII like a thunderclap. Why was Ptolemy XIII there, held as a virtual hostage in the palace by Caesar? Furious at the sight of his older sister Cleopatra forming an alliance with Caesar, Ptolemy XIII hurled his crown to the floor and rushed out of the palace to incite the mob. However, he was instantly captured by Caesar's Roman legionaries. In order to quell the uprising in Alexandria, Caesar detained the entire royal family within the palace compound. This included Ptolemy XIII, Cleopatra, and Arsinoe IV. Months later, as the siege ground into a stalemate, the Egyptian forces outside demanded that Caesar release their true king. They promised to negotiate peace if Ptolemy XIII was returned to them. According to historical accounts, Ptolemy XIII put on a masterful performance. He wept before Caesar and pleaded, "If you let me go, I will end this war at once." Caesar released him from the palace, a highly calculated political move intended to sow discord within the enemy ranks. Yet, the moment Ptolemy XIII slipped past the Roman blockade and reached the main Egyptian camp, he wiped his tears and immediately took command of the Egyptian army. In February of 47 BC, panic and the sudden realization of vulnerability gripped Ptolemy XIII. Recognizing the existential threat, he dispatched a massive, heavily armed Egyptian force. Its mission was to intercept and crush Mithridates in the open desert before the Pergamene king could alter the balance of the war. But in his haste, Ptolemy severely underestimated the tactical genius and audacity of his Roman adversary. Caesar, technically besieged in Alexandria, saw the precise opportunity he had been waiting for. Instead of marching his men overland into the teeth of the waiting Egyptian army, Caesar executed a masterclass in military maneuverability. Under the cover of tactical deception, he left a nominal garrison to hold his fortified positions. He then boarded his battle-hardened veteran legions onto transport ships. Sailing westward along the coast with the coastal winds, he entirely bypasses the heavy Ptolemaic naval blockades that choked the port. He lands safely and force marches his men inland. The objective is to outpace the Ptolemaic army and merge his legions with the reinforcements of Mithridates. It successfully merged near the fertile, muddy expanse of the Nile Delta. This unification was a disaster for the Egyptians. It forged a terrifying, methodical machinery of Roman military power. The collision of iron and bronze. The decisive confrontation materializes in March. The war took place miles from the city, at a heavily fortified Ptolemaic camp. The Egyptian commanders had chosen their ground carefully, hoping the geography would neutralize the Roman advance. The camp sat upon elevated, craggy terrain, a daunting physical obstacle that forced any attacker to fight uphill. Furthermore, its flank was securely bordered and protected by the deep, swift-flowing waters of the Nile. It was a formidable position that commanded the surrounding landscape. Across the plain stands the army of Ptolemy XIII. Bronze catches the light. The descendants of the Macedonian phalanx hold sarissas pointing toward the sky. The densely packed pikes sway like a forest, their iron tips gleaming. Mercenaries from across the Mediterranean shout in a dozen tongues. Gauls swing longswords, Thracians carry rhomphias, and renegade Romans stand in mail. Chariot horses stamp their hooves, dust pluming around wheels equipped with gleaming sides. Shields display the symbols of the old gods. Suns and eagles adorn the polished armor of the royal guard. The boy king sits beneath a silk canopy on an elevated chariot. His fingers grip the rail, the knuckles shining white. He shifts his weight. A drop of sweat runs down his neck, soaking into his tunic. He swallows, his throat dry. His generals shout orders over the din, their voices cracking. The noise rolls across the plain like a storm, lacking rhythm, lacking order. Opposite them, iron forms a line across the ridge. Roman legionaries stand shoulder to shoulder, their heavy shields locked together in an impenetrable, continuous wall of paint and bosses. Dust settles on their helmets. No man speaks. The wind carries the smell of sweat, vinegar, and leather. The formation breathes as an organism. The straps of their armor creak with every inhalation. The rings of their mail shirts rub together with a sound resembling coins shifting in a bag. Men chew on hardened bread, swallowing without water. When Caesar's legions reached a narrow, steep river heavily fortified by enemy light infantry, Caesar gave a direct order. He commanded his men to cut down the surrounding trees to span both banks and build a bridge by covering them with earth. Roman engineers moved to the front. They carried no weapons. They carried bundles of bound reeds, felled tree trunks, and sacks of earth. They threw the materials into the rushing water. Alexandrian archers released their strings. Arrows rained down. The legionaries raised their rectangular shields. They formed the testudo. The wooden shells absorbed the impacts with a continuous clatter. The engineers worked under the canopy. They built the causeway with methodical precision. The bridge grew. The causeway reached the opposing bank. The testudo dissolved. It reformed into a wedge. Julius Caesar sits on a stool behind the center column, wearing a cloak. He holds a wax tablet, a stylus scratching against the surface. He does not look at the enemy. He reads a tally of grain shipments, calculates the tonnage, presses the end of the stylus into the wax to erase an error, and rewrites the numeral. He nods once to his adjutant. The adjutant turns and raises a flag. The fabric snaps in the wind. A horn sounds from the Roman center. The cornicen blows with full lung capacity, a flat note that cuts through the air without wavering. The Roman line moves forward. Left foot. Right foot. The rhythm echoes off the riverbank. The scuta overlap. The earth vibrates under the tread of 20,000 men. The Germanic and Gallic cavalry had gone first, before dawn, upstream and across and into position on the far bank without being seen. When Caesar arrived at the ford with his main column, the skirmishing began. Ptolemy's light infantry shot from the far bank, the cavalry screening the ford in the standard effort to make a crossing expensive. Then the Germanic cavalry came out of the tree line on the far bank and hit Ptolemy's screen from behind. 100 paces. 80 paces. The Hellenistic lines erupt in noise. War cries tear from throats. Spears strike against shields with a sound resembling a collapsing building. Archers release arrows into the sky, raining shafts down on the advancing Romans. The legionaries raise their shields. Iron tips embed in the planks, but the march does not slow. Their faces lack expression, eyes fixed on the chests of the men opposite them. At 20 paces, the centurions blow their whistles. The Roman front rank stops. They plant their left feet. They lean back. They throw their pila. Javelins arch through the air, darkening the sky. The volley descends on the Ptolemaic front. Wood splinters. Bronze dents. Flesh tears. Men fall into the mud. The shanks of the javelins bend upon impact, lodging deeply into the shields of the phalanx. The bent iron refuses to yield, the sheer weight dragging the defenders' shields downward, fracturing the front line. Gaps appear in the wall of bronze. 2 blasts from the Roman horns. Gladi slide from scabbards, scraping against leather. The legionaries break into a run. They lower their shoulders and hit the disorganized line. The impact cracks ribs. Roman shields push into faces, bosses shattering teeth. The swords move in a brutal rhythm. Thrust upward, twist, withdraw, step forward. The blade targets the groin, the stomach, the throat. The armor of the Ptolemaic guard offers little resistance. Blood sprays across the scuta, mixing with the paint. The Roman line acts as a machine. Whistles blow. The exhausted front rank steps back, and fresh blades from the second rank step forward. The machine consumes the ground step by step. The smell of copper fills the air. Ruptured bowels release their stench. The dust turns to paste, thickening the mud. Yet, the breakthrough does not come from the main line of contact. Caesar stood atop a slight elevation. He tracked the movements of the cohorts. He dispatched Carphalinus with a detachment to scale the undefended side of the hill. The Romans dug their fingers into the wet earth. They hoisted each other over the rocks. They crested the ridge. Iron helmets appeared behind the Egyptian lines. The defenders shattered. The subsequent breach of the perimeter from this commanding height triggers a profound psychological shock. The high ground is compromised. The Egyptian center shatters. It triggers the total collapse of the Egyptian defense. It is here that we must carefully navigate the historical records. The primary Roman source is De Bello Alexandrino. It is a text traditionally attributed to Aulus Hirtius but likely compiled by an anonymous Roman officer. It provides a highly technical, and deeply biased, account of the engagement. This text claims that the Roman losses were astonishingly minimal. It further asserts that upwards of 20,000 Ptolemaic soldiers were either killed or captured. Such statistics are deeply embedded in the tradition of Roman military triumph. They were strategically inflated to emphasize the overwhelming superiority of Roman arms. 19th-century historians, such as Theodore Mommsen, characterized this battle as the inevitable triumph of disciplined Roman legionaries over an outdated, rigid Hellenistic phalanx. However, modern scholarship challenges this simplified narrative. The army of Ptolemy XIII was not a relic of the past. It was heavily supplemented by the Gabiniani, former Roman soldiers left in Egypt years prior, who had integrated into the Ptolemaic state. The defenders of the camp were, in many respects, a modernized and Romanized force. The collapse of the Ptolemaic lines was not due to outdated equipment. It was caused by overwhelming tactical pressure and the psychological shock of the high ground being compromised. A watery grave for an epic. As the defense disintegrates, panic spreads like wildfire. Men turn their backs, abandoning the discipline of centuries. They flee the high ground in a state of absolute, terrified disorder. The retreat becomes a stampede toward the waters of the Nile. The mud slows them. Sandals sink into the sludge. Bones snap under the weight of the frantic crowd. Horses scream, slipping in the mud, their hooves crushing the infantry beneath them. Chariots overturn, the sides slicing into friendly troops. The Romans do not run. They pursue at a walking pace, maintaining the line, driving the spearhead into the backs of the fleeing mob. The riverbank becomes a bottleneck. Thousands of men push against the water's edge. The mud turns red, the blood diluting in the current and drifting northward. Ptolemy XIII, seeing his royal army routed and his kingdom slipping through his fingers, leaves his chariot. He throws his crown to the floorboards and runs toward a small river barge anchored at the bank. His breath comes in gasps, sweat stinging his eyes. He pushes past his own guards, shoving a spearman into the water, and stumbles onto the deck. The biographer Plutarch would later note simply that the king vanished in the heat of the engagement. According to this account, the Nile swallowed him whole, and his body was never recovered by friend or foe. But contemporary Roman accounts provide a visceral reality. Hundreds of desperate, screaming men pour into the shallows, clawing at the ropes, scrambling onto the boat to escape the Roman swords. The vessel tilts. Water spills over the rail, rushing across the deck planks. The structural capacity of the small boat is violently exceeded. The wood cracks. The hull breaches. The barge capsizes, the deck flipping as the mast strikes the water. The boy king falls into the Nile. His elaborate, custom-forged golden breastplate drags him downward, the metal pulling like an anchor. He sinks past the roots of the reeds, his back hitting the riverbed. The mud plumes around him. On the surface, a stream of bubbles surfaces and pops. Planks drift northward toward the sea. Bodies float face down, the fabric of their tunics billowing like jellyfish. Later Roman accounts reported a chilling discovery made in the aftermath of the slaughter. A magnificent, custom-forged golden corselet was dragged from the thick, dark silt of the riverbed. It was the unmistakable, shining armor of the Ptolemaic king. Covered in mud but gleaming in the sun, it served as a grisly, tangible trophy. It confirmed the monarch's demise and symbolized Rome's absolute, crushing victory over the ancient dynasty. Caesar closes his wax tablet. He stands up. He hands the tablet to his adjutant. He points toward Alexandria. The flags wave. The army turns. They begin the march. The thud of sandals resumes. The river remains. The shadow of Rome. In the palace at Alexandria, a woman sits in a stone room. Pillars support the ceiling. Dust motes float in the shafts of light. The air smells of myrrh. She picks up a mirror, her reflection showing no expression. She places a ring on her index finger, the metal sliding over her knuckle. A servant enters, his knees striking the marble floor. He places a bloodied, torn cloak at her feet. The embroidery bears the unraveling crest of the Ptolemies. She does not look at the servant. She looks at the cloth. She turns her hand, the ring catching the light. Outside the window, Roman boots march across the courtyard. The hobnails strike the stone, the sound echoing through the halls. The gates close. The lock turns. The iron secures the wood. The empire shifts. By late March, Caesar returns to Alexandria not as an arbitrator, but as an undisputed conqueror. The Roman victory at the Battle of the Nile is absolute, permanently shattering the Ptolemaic crown. Cleopatra VII is established as the joint ruler alongside her pliant younger brother, Ptolemy XIV. However, the nature of her kingship is fundamentally altered. Caesar appointed Rufio to command the 3 legions left behind as a permanent garrison. The installation of a compliant asset was complete. The iron collar of Rome snapped shut around the neck of Egypt. The victory does not result in the immediate, formal annexation of Egypt. Instead, Caesar achieves something equally potent: the establishment of an unbreakable client-state relationship. The crown is technically preserved, but it is entirely dependent upon the presence of Roman garrisons and the political patronage of Rome. The battle successfully concludes the total subjugation of the last great Hellenistic kingdom. The iron grip of the Roman Republic is now inextricably fastened upon the granary of the Mediterranean. The vast agricultural wealth that had sustained the pharaohs will now feed the citizens of Rome. The Hellenistic world, inaugurated by the conquests of Alexander the Great 3 centuries earlier, quietly expires on the banks of the river, replaced by the encroaching, inescapable reality of Rome. It signaled the bloody beginning of Egypt's long, inevitable history as a mere Roman province in all but name. Yet the Egyptian state did not completely collapse. This was not an act of mercy. It was Caesar's paranoia. The historian Suetonius later recorded, "He left the kingdom to Cleopatra and her younger brother, hesitating to make it a province, fearing lest a violent governor might use it as a base of operations for a rebellion." Caesar trusted no one within the Roman elite. He knew that any senator handed the infinite grain and gold of Egypt would inevitably forge it into a weapon against him. Therefore, he denied the command to the aristocracy, placing the 3 occupying legions under Rufio, the son of a lowly freedman. The mints of Alexandria did not strike Roman denarii. They continued to press Ptolemaic silver tetradrachms, bearing the face of the queen. The great conqueror spared the conquered, terrified that another Caesar might rise from the wealth of the Nile. A shadow lengthened across the floor. The systems that had brought him to this power were beginning to fracture in Rome. The terror of the true systemic collapse was only just beginning, whispering from the Senate House across the sea. The palace servants cleared the rooms. The crown was placed in a cedar box and entered into a Roman inventory. The priests adjusted certain words in their recitations and continued. In the Delta, the farmers had returned to their fields before the bodies were removed from the riverbank. They cut the same grain they had always cut. They loaded it onto the same barges and sent it north. The barges still go north.